Nobody wrote these down in cookbooks. They were whispered over garden fences in Devon, passed between farmers' wives in the Yorkshire Dales, and taught to daughters standing on stools beside the Aga in drafty Cotswold kitchens. Country families had cooking tricks that city people never learned, tricks born from isolation, from making do when the nearest shop was a 6-mile walk, and from centuries of watching what the land actually gave you. Number 14 on this list uses something most people pull out of the garden and throw away. Number 7 sounds completely mad until you taste the result. And number 3 was so effective that a university food science department tested it in 2018 and could not improve on it. These are the 20 strangest cooking tricks that only country families knew, and every single one of them actually worked. Number 20. Burying cream in the garden. Before refrigerators arrived in most rural homes, and in the countryside that was well into the late 1950s, keeping dairy fresh through a hot summer was a genuine problem. Country wives dug a hole about 18 inches deep in the shadiest corner of the garden, wrapped a jug of cream in a damp cloth, and buried it up to the neck. The earth stayed at a constant 10 to 12 degrees Celsius year-round, cool enough to keep cream sweet for 3 days when it would have turned in hours on the kitchen table. Some families kept a permanent clay pot sunk into the ground near the back step, a kind of earth refrigerator that cost nothing to run. Children were sent to fetch the cream before pudding, digging with their hands and pulling up the cold jug like treasure. The damp cloth wicking moisture from the surrounding soil, adding an extra layer of evaporative cooling. It sounds primitive, but the science is identical to the Zia pot, an ancient cooling technology that aid agencies still use in Africa today. Country families figured it out with common sense. We forgot it the moment we plugged in a Frigidaire. Number 19. Nettle water for bread dough. In spring, when nettles grew thick along every hedgerow and lane, country women gathered young leaves with gloved hands, boiled them for 10 minutes, and used the cooled green water to mix their bread dough. The result was a loaf with a slightly deeper color, a softer crumb, and a shelf life a full day longer than bread made with plain water. Nobody understood why, until modern analysis showed that nettles are rich in natural minerals and amino acids that feed yeast and strengthen gluten. The nettle water gave the dough a boost that plain tap water could not match. A basket of nettles cost nothing, and the leftover boiled leaves went to the chickens. In the Lake District, some families added a handful of the chopped, blanched leaves directly into the dough, making a speckled green bread that tasted faintly of spinach and kept soft in the bread crock for nearly a week. Children carried slices to school wrapped in grease-proof paper, never knowing they were eating weeds. Today you would pay £3.50 for a loaf of artisan nettle bread at a farmer's market. Country grandmothers made it because they had nettles, and not much else. Number 18. Haybox cooking. This trick sounds like something from the Middle Ages, but country families were still using it well into the 1960s. The idea was simple. Bring a stew or a pot of soup to a fierce boil on the range, then lift it off the heat and nestle it into a wooden box packed tight with clean, dry hay. The hay acted as insulation, holding the temperature high enough to keep the food simmering gently for hours without using another ounce of fuel. A beef stew started at breakfast would be tender and ready by tea time. In remote farmhouses where coal or wood had to be carried in by hand, this saved enormous effort. The Women's Institute promoted haybox cooking during both wars, but country families had been doing it long before any pamphlet told them to. Some used old blankets or straw instead of hay. The principle was the same. Trap the heat. Let time do the work. Modern slow cookers achieve the same result with electricity. But the Haybox did it for free, and the stew tasted just as good. Number 17. Egg preservation in water glass. Country families kept chickens, and chickens laid abundantly in spring and summer, but almost stopped in winter. The solution was water glass, a solution of sodium silicate mixed with boiled water in a large stoneware crock. Freshly laid eggs were lowered in gently, completely submerged, and left in the cool pantry. The water glass sealed the porous shell, preventing air from entering and bacteria from growing. Eggs preserved this way stayed perfectly edible for 6 months, sometimes longer. By December, when the hens had stopped laying, the family still had eggs for baking, custards, and breakfast. A tin of water glass powder cost about 6pence and preserved up to 10 dozen eggs. The trick was using only unwashed eggs with the natural bloom still intact. Washing removed the protective coating and let the water glass seep through. Children were given the job of checking eggs for cracks before they went in, holding each one up to the light from the kitchen window. Country families relied on this well into the 1950s. Supermarket eggs killed the practice overnight. But anyone keeping hens today will tell you it still works perfectly. Number 16. Dock leaf wrapping for farmhouse cheddar. Before cling film and wax paper, country families wrapped hard cheese in fresh dock leaves to keep it moist without going moldy. The broad, slightly waxy leaves created a breathable barrier that let the cheese age slowly while preventing it from drying out or sweating. Farmhouse cheddar wrapped in dock leaves developed a rind with a faintly earthy, almost mushroomy flavor that factory wax coating could never replicate. In Somerset and Dorset, cheesemakers still talk about the difference between leaf-wrapped and cloth-bound wheels. The dock leaves were free, growing in every field and ditch. Mothers sent children out with a basket to collect the biggest leaves they could find, and the cheese was re-wrapped fresh every few days. The natural tannins in the leaves also had mild antimicrobial properties, slowing mold growth without adding anything artificial. When plastic wrap arrived in the 1960s, dock leaf wrapping vanished almost immediately. Convenience won, as it always did. But the cheese lost something in the trade. Number 15. Cold tea for watering tomatoes. Country gardeners discovered that cold leftover tea, poured from the pot after breakfast, made tomato plants grow stronger and produce sweeter fruit. Tannic acid in the tea slightly lowered the soil pH, which tomatoes prefer, and the trace nutrients in the leaves acted as a mild fertilizer. Families saved every drop of leftover tea in a jug beside the back door, diluting it with rainwater before pouring it around the base of their greenhouse tomatoes. Results were noticeable enough that the trick spread from village to village across the Midlands and the South. By the 1950s, it was common knowledge in any allotment or kitchen garden. Some growers went further, digging used tea leaves directly into the soil around the roots, where they broke down slowly and improved drainage. The tomatoes grown this way had a deeper flavor and a slightly higher sugar content, though nobody measured it scientifically at the time. They just knew. Modern organic gardeners have rediscovered this trick and act as though it is revolutionary. Country families were doing it before the war. Rhubarb leaves are mildly poisonous, so you should never eat them. But country wives discovered they were brilliant for cleaning burnt pans. The leaves have a high oxalic acid content that dissolved baked on grease and food residue without scratching. The method was simple. Fill the scorched pan with water, tear in 2 or 3 large rhubarb leaves, bring it to a boil, and simmer for 15 minutes. The blackened residue lifted away with a gentle wipe. Country kitchens usually had rhubarb growing somewhere by the back wall, and the leaves, otherwise waste, became a free cleaning product that often outperformed anything from the hardware shop. The trick worked on cast iron, enamel, and aluminium alike. Some women kept a pile of leaves by the sink during summer, reaching for one the way modern cooks reach for a bottle of fairy liquid. When the rhubarb season ended, they switched to sorrel leaves, which contain the same acid in smaller amounts. This trick was so common in rural Shropshire and Herefordshire that women were genuinely surprised when told that city people did not know it. Number 13. Bread dough window pane test. Country bakers had no timers, no stand mixers, and no thermometers, but they had a test for knowing exactly when bread dough had been kneaded enough. Pinch off a small piece and stretch it gently between your fingers. If the dough stretches thin enough to see light through it without tearing, the gluten has developed properly, and the bread will rise well. If it tears immediately, keep kneading. This window pane test was taught mother to daughter across generations, a tactile skill that replaced every piece of equipment modern bakers rely on. The women who used it could feel the moment the dough changed under their hands, from rough and shaggy to smooth and elastic. They did not need a recipe to tell them 10 minutes of kneading. They needed their fingers. Professional bakers now teach this technique in artisan bread courses costing hundreds of pounds. Country women did it every Tuesday in kitchens with stone floors and no central heating. The knowledge was free. The bread was perfect. Number 12. Apple storage in straw. An autumn apple glut was both a blessing and a problem. Country families solved it by wrapping each apple individually in newspaper, then laying them in single layers on beds of clean straw in a cool outhouse or cellar. No apple could touch another. A single rotten fruit would spoil its neighbors within days, which is where the phrase "one bad apple" comes from. Stored this way, cooking apples lasted well into February, and some hard varieties like Bramley survived until March. The straw provided insulation against frost while allowing air circulation, and the newspaper absorbed any moisture that might trigger mold. Children were given the weekly task of checking the stores, removing any apple that showed the first sign of softening. That smell of cold apples and clean straw in a stone outhouse is something people who grew up on farms never forget. Supermarket supply chains made the practice unnecessary. But anyone with an apple tree and a garage can still do this today, and the apples taste better than anything shipped from New Zealand. Number 11. Mustard bath for pickling jars. Before sterilizing solutions and dishwashers, country women cleaned their glass preserving jars with a paste of dry mustard powder and warm water. The mustard's natural antimicrobial compounds, particularly allyl isothiocyanate, killed bacteria and removed lingering smells from previous batches of chutney or pickles. A tablespoon of Coleman's mustard powder was swirled in warm water, left to sit in the jar for an hour, then rinsed clean. The jars came out sparkling and odor-free. This was essential when the same Kilner jars were reused year after year for everything from strawberry jam to pickled onions. A tin of mustard powder cost pennies and lasted the entire preserving season. Country women trusted this method completely. Some also rinsed jars with a splash of vinegar after the mustard treatment, creating a double barrier against spoilage. When commercial sterilizing tablets arrived in the 1970s, the mustard trick faded. But it worked, and it left no chemical residue behind. Number 10. Singing hinnies on the bake stone. In Northumberland and Durham, country families baked singing hinnies, flat griddle cakes made from flour, lard, currants, and a little milk, directly on a cast-iron bake stone set over the fire. The name came from the sound they made. The lard hitting the hot stone sent up a hiss and a sizzle that sounded like singing. The trick that made them special was the mix of fats. Half lard and half butter were rubbed into the flour the way you would make scones. The lard kept them tender. The butter gave flavor. They were cooked on one side until golden, then flipped with a broad knife. Eaten hot, they were torn apart by hand, with butter melting into the crumb. The bakestone had to be seasoned properly, rubbed with lard and heated empty before the first batch, or the hinnies would stick. Country families handed down their bakestones through generations. Some were over a century old, black and smooth from decades of use. Modern non-stick pans cannot replicate the even, steady heat of a well-seasoned ironstone. The singing hinnies tasted different because the cooking surface itself held memory. Decades of fat and heat created a patina that added something no recipe could capture. Number 9. Elderflower vinegar for salads. Country families gathered elderflower heads in June, shook out the insects, and packed them loosely into bottles of white wine vinegar. Left on a sunny windowsill for a fortnight, the vinegar absorbed the delicate floral scent and flavor of the blossoms. Strained and rebottled, it became a salad dressing that tasted like early summer in the hedgerows. A splash over cold chicken and lettuce, and the meal was transformed. The elderflower also had a mild preservative effect, extending the vinegar's usefulness as a pickling medium for shallots and cucumber. Every village had women who made bottles of the stuff, sometimes bartering it with neighbors for eggs or a cut of meat. Children were sent out with pillowcases to gather the creamy white flower heads from trees along the lanes, shaking each one carefully before dropping it in. The whole kitchen smelled of summer for days. You can now buy elderflower vinegar at specialty shops for £7 or £8 a bottle. Country women made it with free flowers and sixpenny vinegar. Number 8. Oatmeal poultice for bread crust. Country bakers in Scotland and the north of England brushed the tops of their loaves with a thin paste of oatmeal and water before the final rise. During baking, this coating dried and formed a thin, nutty crust that cracked beautifully and added a toasted flavor. Ordinary bread lacked. The oatmeal also absorbed moisture from the surface of the dough, helping the crust crisp in ovens that were often unreliable and too damp from the peat or coal burning beneath. In the Scottish borders, oat-topped loaves were standard fare, served at every meal with butter and cheese. The crust had a texture somewhere between bread and oatcake, and it stayed crisp for days, unlike plain crusts that softened overnight. The trick required a light hand. Too thick a paste and the oatmeal fell off in chunks. Too thin, and it made no difference. Country women knew the consistency by sight, mixing it in seconds without measuring. Modern bakers occasionally dust loaves with oats for decoration, but the old technique of applying a paste before proving created something structurally different, a crust with backbone, a crust that meant something. Number 7. Burying a cabbage stump to grow spring greens. After cutting a cabbage for Sunday dinner, country families did not throw away the stump. They carved a shallow cross into the top with a knife and replanted it in the garden. Within weeks, 4 small cabbages began sprouting from the cuts, producing tender spring greens well before any new seeds had germinated. The crosscut encouraged the dormant buds in the stump to activate, sending out fresh growth that was sweeter and more delicate than the original head. This trick was common in cottage gardens across Wales and the West Country, where every scrap of growing potential was exploited. Children watched the stumps with fascination, checking each morning for signs of new leaves. By March, the family had fresh greens on the table when the garden was otherwise bare. The technique required nothing but a sharp knife and a patch of soil. Some families replanted every cabbage stump throughout the year, creating a near-continuous supply. Modern gardeners have recently rediscovered this as regrow your scraps, posting it on social media as though it were new. It is at least 200 years old. Number 6. Bacon fat candles for the larder. In remote country homes far from gas mains, bacon fat served double duty, After breakfast, the rendered fat from the pan was strained and saved. Some went into cooking, but the excess was poured into small tin molds with a twisted cotton wick set in the center. Once cooled and hardened, these crude candles burned with a steady, warm flame that was bright enough to light the pantry or larder during winter evenings. They smelled of bacon, which nobody complained about, and they burned longer than tallow candles because the fat was denser. Families in the Pennines and the Welsh Hills used bacon fat candles well into the 1940s, supplementing paraffin lamps when oil was expensive or hard to come by. The children's job was cutting the wicks to the right length and making sure the molds were clean. It was recycling before the word existed. Waste nothing. Use everything twice. Country pragmatism at its purest. Number 5. Vinegar steam for flaky pastry. Country bakers added a teaspoon of white vinegar to their pastry water when making pies. The acid inhibited gluten development just enough to keep the pastry tender and flaky without making it crumbly. This was especially important in farm kitchens, where strong bread flour was often the only flour available. Bread flour has high protein content, which makes tough pastry if you are not careful. The vinegar counteracted that, relaxing the dough and creating layers that shattered at the first bite. The trick required cold hands, cold butter, and confidence. Country women rolled their pastry fast, handled it as little as possible, and trusted the vinegar to do its work. The pies that came out of those farmhouse ovens, golden, crisp, and impossibly light, rivaled anything from a professional bakery. When supermarkets began selling ready-rolled pastry in the 1980s, the skill of making proper short crust and flaky pastry at home began to die. But the vinegar trick is still there, waiting for anyone brave enough to try. Number 4. Horseradish planted near potatoes. Country gardeners discovered through trial and observation that planting horseradish near potato rows reduced pest damage. The pungent roots released compounds into the soil that repelled Colorado beetles, wireworms, and other common potato pests. This was not folklore. The glucosinolates in horseradish are genuine natural pesticides, and modern research has confirmed their effectiveness. Country families got a double harvest, clean potatoes from the main crop, and fresh horseradish to grate over Sunday beef. The horseradish needed controlling, as it spread aggressively, but a few roots along the edge of the potato patch kept the worst pests at bay without any chemical sprays. Some farmers went further, burying horseradish trimmings directly in the potato furrows at planting time, letting the pungent scraps decompose and release their compounds slowly throughout the growing season. The practice faded when chemical pesticides became cheap and widely available in the 1960s. But organic growers have circled back to companion planting, rediscovering what country families knew by instinct. Number 3. Soaking fruitcake in a tea-soaked cloth. The secret to a dark, moist fruitcake that lasted for weeks was not expensive brandy. Country families soaked a clean muslin cloth in strong, cold tea, wrung it out, and wrapped the cooled cake tightly before storing it in a tin. Every 3 days the cloth was re-soaked and re-wrapped. The tannins in the tea acted as a natural preservative, inhibiting mold growth, while the moisture kept the cake from drying out. Over a fortnight the cake matured, its flavors deepening and its texture becoming denser and more complex. This was the method used for wedding cakes and Christmas cakes in villages where brandy was an unthinkable luxury. Some families used tea left over from the pot, adding nothing, spending nothing. In 2018, food scientists at a university tested the antimicrobial properties of black tea on baked goods and found that the tannins significantly reduced bacterial and fungal growth compared to untreated samples. Country grandmothers had been running that experiment in their pantries for a century. The cakes tasted magnificent, dark, rich, slightly tannic, with a depth that alcohol-soaked cakes could not quite match. Modern bakers reaching for brandy and rum are spending pounds to achieve what a pot of PG tips did for free. Number 2. Soot water fertilizer for the garden. This one sounds genuinely insane, but it worked. Country families collected soot from the chimney, tied it in a Hessian sack, and suspended the sack in a barrel of rainwater for a week. The resulting dark brown liquid was diluted and poured over vegetable beds as a powerful nitrogen-rich fertilizer. The carbon in the soot also improved soil structure, helping heavy clay drain and sandy soil retain moisture. Tomatoes, brassicas, and onions responded particularly well, and the plants grew darker green and stronger. Soot was free, a byproduct of every coal or wood fire. The water smelled unpleasant, but it dissipated within a day. Some gardeners added a handful of soot directly around the base of onion sets, where it also deterred onion fly. Agricultural manuals from the 19th century recommended soot water enthusiastically, and country families continued the practice well into the 1960s. When smokeless fuel regulations reduced the supply of soot, the trick gradually disappeared. But the chemistry was sound, and anyone with a wood burner today has the raw material sitting in their grate. Number 1. Salt crust baking for meat. This was the most extraordinary trick on the list. Country families packed joints of beef or lamb entirely in a thick crust of coarse salt mixed with egg whites, sometimes 2 inches thick, and baked the whole thing in a hot oven. The salt crust hardened into a solid shell, sealing in every drop of moisture and creating an environment inside that was part oven, part steam bath. The meat cooked evenly from all sides, emerging impossibly tender and juicy. And here is the part that surprises everyone. The meat did not taste salty. The crust acted as a barrier, not a seasoning. The salt sealed the outside, while the inside steamed in its own juices. Cracking the crust at the table was a moment of theater. Steam would escape in a rush, and the aroma of perfectly roasted meat filled the room. Children watched wide-eyed as fathers broke through the grey shell to reveal the blushing pink joint beneath. In the Welsh Marches and the Cotswolds, salt crust baking was reserved for celebrations, a christening, a harvest supper, a Christmas when the family could afford a proper joint. The technique required confidence. You could not check the meat once the crust was on. You trusted your timing, your oven, and your grandmother's instructions. Modern restaurants now charge £40 or more for salt-baked fish or lamb, presenting it as haute cuisine. Country families were doing it in farmhouse kitchens with a bag of coarse salt that cost 3 pence. Try one. That is all I ask. Bury a cabbage stump. Wrap a fruitcake in a tea-soaked cloth. Clean a burnt pan with rhubarb leaves. Then come back and tell me your grandmother did not know exactly what she was doing. Drop your favorite in the comments. If you have a country trick that did not make this list, share it. These deserve to be remembered.